Where did everything go wrong? I guess that is the question that you had when you saw your disappointed face reflected on whatever screen you were watching once it cut to black. I am here to try and answer that for you. While the finale in Season 5 of The Boys has received a lot of backlash, it is not where the issues really start. I am not exactly breaking new ground here. Season 4 has already made its rounds of infamy for being, well, to put it more elegantly, ass. There are so many textual reasons why the last season has failed in the way that it did, but I believe there is also a contextual reason why things went wrong. That is the desire for The Boys to be larger than it should be. And that is called the VCU, aka the Vought Cinematic Universe. And friends, if you watched me at all before, y'all already know how I feel about this universe. I usually do not harbor very warm sentiments towards such universes because more often than not, they are not there to tell you a good story, but they are there to lighten your wallets. So far, the VCU has the mothership show The Boys, a spin-off titled Gen V, and an upcoming prequel show titled Vought Rising. Oh, and there's also an animated little show titled The Boys Diabolical. I never really watched that, but apparently it's not very canon, and it features a, to borrow the words of a Redditor nicknamed profile_person, really shitty episode where a character controls shit. So if you want to have your Avatar the Last Shitbender, here you go. To put it shortly, VCU is for now a complete shit show. Yes, The Boys Season 5 is a flop, but it is a flop that extends across the universe, and in my opinion, kinda buries it. So to understand the full scale of issues with The Boys, we will be touching on all of the TV shows. And yes, that also includes Vought Rising. Okay, before we formally begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, give it that algorithmic pat on the back, comment. I know I have been absent for a couple of months, I'm sorry for that. The last few months have been extremely rough. Anyway, so enough of me yapping and let's go on this little journey together to explore the downfall of The Boys. So let's first start with what The Boys actually is. There have been a lot of terms thrown around as to what it is, and in my view, there has also been a lot of misconception. Some of that misconception is actually reflected in what Eric Kripke, the showrunner behind The Boys, has said before, even before the ridiculous finale aired. Kripke had become a bit of a controversial figure in the fandom due to the things that he says, and he provides rather interesting takes on his work pretty consistently, and it certainly didn't start around Season 5 of The Boys. When asked about the show's relevance, all the way back in 2019, he had this to say: "The thing that makes this project different from the others is that it's all about asking the question, what would superheroes really be like in our world with the most rigorous application of reality? The answer is they would be uber celebrities." So I'd say that's the thing that makes this show, I think, frankly, more realistic than any other superhero show. And then also where it stakes new ground is that it's about these massive celebrities, it's about social media, it's about where celebrity and politics intersect. It's about how people are now packaging their political messages in slick entertainment bites to get the American public to act against their own best interests, and how it's almost now indistinguishable between the people who have political power and the people who have celebrity power. It's frighteningly prescient. I do not want to claim that I know The Boys better than the person who helped create the TV show, but I do want to push back on the supposed question that is being asked, because no, The Boys is not a realistic depiction of what superheroes would really be like in our world. This sets up an unrealistic standard of judgment towards the show that the show never really even tried to reach. You wouldn't know this from the statement though. I will concede that it does try sometimes to be realistic, but the supposed realism that people may see usually amounts to edgy humor, exaggeration, and gore. That is because at the very core, it is not the question that is being asked with the show. The better question is, what would superheroes really be like in a world where they were created by a mega corporation? That is the proper formulation of the show's premise. You might say I am being unnecessarily pedantic, but this difference does produce different results. It is a big asterisk within the narrative that a statement like this ignores, because the second one can really go only so far in terms of how realistic it is in regards to superhero depiction, and instead, it should be focused on how realistic it depicts megacorporations and their influence over the population in the use of superheroes as a tool to do that. It also notably has a predisposition towards the subject matter and steers into satire. It seeks to criticize celebrity culture and capitalism. Satire is built on exaggeration, hyperbole, humor, sarcasm. It also tends to be cynical, which can, for the most part, make a TV show like this an allegory, but certainly not a realistic depiction of a scenario in the real world, which is why it is also not a proper deconstruction of the the superhero genre. I personally have no clue when we began equating deconstruction to a TV show being edgy about something, but profane jokes do not equate to a realistic depiction. For illustrative purposes, let's put this to test. Let's take a trope that is common in the superhero genre. Super teams. Think of Avengers, Justice League, and the like. The Boys uses this trope and has the Seven. The Seven, however, are not depicted with any rigorous application of reality. We do not see, for instance, a realistic depictions of how it would be like to manage such a team, what sort of repercussions such a team would face, or how it would actually be like to be part of a super team. These are only a couple of sample questions you can ask to try and poke at this trope. The Boys never does that. What it does instead is ask, what would we have if a megacorporation had a super team? From Vought creating the soups to creating their crime itineraries and staging saving events, to Vought producing movies and turning the heroes into brands. It is always reliant on that one asterisk that we talked about. When you combine this with a lens of satire, these tropes are further colored into a parody. Various characters or versions of tropes of superheroes that already exist out there, with a comedic or weird twist to them. So no, it is not exactly deconstruction. What this entails is that the soups are just an allegorical example of the products corporations use to control society. The soups in this scenario, they are a skin that makes the core of the speculative scenario more appealing. And the issue with The Boys is not that it necessarily forgets this. At no point does it try becoming what it never was, despite what Kripke or anyone else involved might say. The issue comes when the show thinks that it has way more content in regards to this than it actually has, and that it deludes itself into thinking that it can maintain this satire narrative momentum without any consequences to its quality. This little universe simply overstays its welcome to such an extent that the satire loses all of its meaning. So we can now look at the narrative and how what we discussed affects it. I think we should divide it into two distinct blocks, Season 1 and 3, and Seasons 4 and 5 plus both seasons of Gen V. Why that division exactly? Well, Seasons 1 to 3 contain a very specific narrative trajectory. At first we have our team called the Boys who come together in different ways, and all of them have at least some beef with Vought and Soups. Enough of a beef to go after them. Initially that beef is more scattered since Huey and Butcher, for instance, are after different Soups. Huey hates A-Train for what he did to his girlfriend Robin, and Butcher hates Homelander for what he did to Becca. Their overarching beef, however, remains with Vought. However, Seasons 1 to 3 are also Homelander's ascent to power and descent into madness. Over time, Homelander sort of becomes the final boss of everything. I don't want to exhaust you all and won't go into all the details of this narrative because plenty has already been said, but the main question towards the end there does become how to defeat Homelander. I want to fast forward to Season 3 because this is where we get the closest to the answer to that question, which is Soldier Boy. He is introduced as a bit of a legend in the third season, and he is said to be the Homelander before Homelander, and he is also literally Homelander's dad. For some brief recap, the Boys find him frozen in ice, they defrost him, and then proceed to make a deal that Soldier Boy kills Homelander, and then Soldier Boy gets to live his life in peace. And that went really well. I mean, Soldier Boy seems like the solution, right? That is until episode 8 of season 3, where we finally get the confrontation between Homelander and the Boys. So the show had two choices, either reasonably end the Homelander storyline then and there and continue in some form in some other way, or to drag out the Homelander storyline because people like Anthony Starr. No shade towards the actor, I love Homelander and his performance. But guess which one they chose? And then the show proceeds to do a good old cop-out. Due to some not at all contrived shenanigans involving Soldier Boy wanting to hurt Homelander's son Ryan, Homelander ends up teaming up with Butcher to take down Soldier Boy. Needless to say, I wasn't pleased with this ending of the season. Honestly, the first thought that popped into my head was, oh, they're dragging this out, aren't they? And hey, it is not even that the Boys not achieving their goal is entirely bad. Not everything works out in real life either all the time. But we are talking about 3 seasons of build-up and 3 seasons of Homelander basically accumulating power and going about without any proper consequences. This comes as a bit of a contradiction of what the show initially seemed to set out to do, because most if not all of what they supposedly try to say and parody and satirize has already been communicated to us by the time we come to the finale of season 3. A lot of the supposed satire has already happened in the first 3 seasons. Same goes with plot points. We have already seen the many ways the show twists its formula and world building. We really didn't need that much more of it, and this is where I would consider the Boys universe, or I suppose the VCU now, having reached the halfway point point of the Homelander narrative. This is where we officially begin stepping into full shit and begin doing laps around the same objectives and plot points, just to drag our feet. Because let's do the math here. We have 7 years between The Boys' start and finale. Season 3 is 3 years in. 3 years in, we already had a potential solution to take down Homelander, but the show chickens out, which then spawns 4 seasons of content. 4, which all had Homelander as its central axis. And yes, this includes the first spin-off show, Gen V. The viewership of Gen V would suggest that it is relatively insignificant in relation to The Boys. If you went to look at ratings, you would see that it received only a fraction of the viewership that The Boys received. This is to be expected. It is a spin-off, but it is also the logic that the universe chooses not to account for. I say chooses because it certainly knows what it is doing. The gravest sin that is being committed with Gen V is the one being committed against it. That is the relationship that it has with the mothership show. The math of it is all pretty simple. On the surface, Gen V is a television show that follows Marie Moreau, a character who becomes a student at Godolphin University. Godolphin University is a place where super-abled young adults can explore their talents and find their place in the world. There's also the possibility of them getting recruited into the Seven. It then proceeds to follow the exploits of Marie and her friend group of students, allowing for a more juvenile lens in an otherwise extremely adult world of The Boys. But this is just a trench coat. Below the surface, Gen V is a very deliberate attempt at building narrative arguments on how to defeat Homelander. Both seasons, in fact. The first season's premise is that we are introduced to Godolphin University, however, we soon find out that God U is not really just a university, but actually a whole experiment to monitor and study soups. In addition to that, it turns out that the dean of the unit, Indira Shetty, has been developing a virus that can target and kill soups. She has a whole backstory surrounding the flight that Homelander decides to doom in the first season of The Boys. She explains that her family was killed on that flight and that Homelander is the reason why she hates soups and wants them dead.
Why? Homelander? Homelander? He took down that plane. He killed your family? It's not just him. You all leave a path of destruction behind you.
It's a pretty cool motive if you ask me. The VCU uses this as an opportunity to set up this argument for The Boys. Gen V Season 1 sees Victoria Newman enter the stage, talk to Marie for a bit, then swoop in to take over the virus from the spin-off characters, and dip.
Is this all of it? Yeah. And you're the only one who knows how to replicate it, right?
Oh. You must be a little dry.
Never to resurface in Gen V again. Other characters also make an appearance from The Boys. Ashley, A-Train, Homelander come and go very casually and without a lot of fanfare. We also have a post-credit scene where Butcher is entering the facility and discovering that virus for himself. And I am certainly not critiquing this approach. It makes for a seamless universe when both the spin-off and the main show can share characters this freely and both of them are focused on Homelander, but that only applies from the Gen V point of view. The question is, how does that go on to affect the main show, The Boys? Well, the main show treats Gen V as it is, kind of a lore dump. What Season 4 of The Boys gleans from this is that there is a soup-killing virus, Newman now has it, and that is about it. You can notice this barrier between the two narratives in all the scenes that even attempt to touch Gen V material. We only get the stuff that can be easily explained as soup-killing virus can be. The two soups that make a cameo from Gen V, they are treated as any D-list soup in The Boys is treated. The logic here is that giving additional significance to narrative elements from Gen V would risk alienating people who only watch The Boys. They expect for viewers of Gen V to be the viewers of The Boys, but they do not expect for the viewers of The Boys to be the viewers of Gen V. Because, at the end of the day, even the writers recognize that it is a lot to ask for people to watch additional 16 episodes and 2 seasons of a spin-off to get the full plot. So where's the problem in that? Well, there is no problem in that when it comes to Season 1. For clarity's sake, let's go in release order and leave this at that until further notice. And let's turn our eyes to Season 4 of The Boys. Just a spoiler, this is not going to be a glowing review. Season 4 of The Boys deserves belt to ass for the amount of nonsense it pulls. If I was to describe why Season 4 sucks, it is because it repeats a lot of things that already were in one way or the other done, and a lot of that nonsense when it comes to the plot can be traced back to the inclusion of Sister Sage. So, some background on Sister Sage. Sister Sage is supposed to be The Boys' branded twist on a superhero whose power is superintelligence. People have had many discussions as to what her powers exactly are are online, but these will be pretty irrelevant for the most part, because however way you spin it, it is not exactly her powers that are the main issue, it is more so what her function is to the plot. So Homelander, after being fed up about how he is supposedly surrounded by sycophants, goes out to find Sister Sage and asks her for advice. The first way in which her intelligence is demonstrated to the viewer is by her spouting random observations at Homelander, which I have no clue as to their validity, but whatever.
Based on your public appearances, your stylist is dyeing your hair more often. Used to be every month, now it's every 2.4 weeks. Did she tell you you're going gray, or is she hiding it? And your large prostate.
My fucking what?
Spout that bullshit, sister, I guess. He laments to her about how he got everything he wanted, people allow him to do whatever he wants because they fear him, and he is still not happy. Sister Sage then delivers very basic stuff about how people are dumb and democracies fail because people are dumb.
Rome, Greece, all democracies fail because people are fucking stupid.
So she suggests that, in order to feel happiness to fill in that void, he needs to be their savior. And to do that, he needs to nudge people so that the people tear each other apart and he can come in and save the day.
The people will tear it apart themselves. Just gotta nudge them a little. And you get to swoop in, be the one saving it.
She basically tells him that he needs to manufacture shit for people to start to love him, and that is how he will fill that void. And I am going to hold the show's hand when I say this. Sister Sage is not a character, she is a plot device. More than that, she's a very unnecessary plot device that was born out of repetition. And I say this with all of the love towards the actress playing her, she is so nicely performed. But to me, Sister Sage is just such an artificial way to make the plots of season 4 and 5 sound interesting and nothing else. She occupies the same function as a fancy prophecy in a narrative. She's there to tell us that grand things are happening, but just you wait. You may not entirely see them, or at all really, but they are happening. And I think this is where the show shoots itself in the foot the most. The whole smartest person on the planet thing is very overblown, and it sets a lot of expectations for the plot that the show is never even close to fulfilling. Again, I have seen so many interpretations of Sister Sage, and most of them are focused on whether she was responsible for things happening, but I think we also need to critically evaluate the things that she is responsible for. So after Sister Sage spouts the bullshit, she gets hired, she does a couple of things first. First, she proceeds to incite a violent conflict between Starlighters and Homelander supporters. She attends a rally and incites a riot which becomes violent.
Fuck you, fascist!
Then she orders Noir, A-Train, and the Deep to kill 3 random people who are then placed onto the scene to frame Starlighters as having killed them, glossing over the fact that she just murdered 3 people who were not even attending the event and were unrelated to the scene. She proceeds to use this as ammunition against Starlighters. Then the second thing that she does is hire Firecracker. Firecracker is this popular right-wing leaning persona who happens to have a platform. Sage hires her to supposedly amplify the message of Homelander and to further polarize the country, and I kind of have an issue with both of these methods. By making Sage commit these actions, the show attempts to fool you into thinking that these are some 4D chess moves never seen before, but they are not. If you boil down what these actions are meant to do, they are just methods of controlling the narrative that all of the previous seasons also had. Literally, I want you to tell me, what is so different that Sister Sage does that Vought wasn't already doing? Staging events, spinning stories, and amplifying things through various media channels is literally what Vought was always doing. What is so different that the plot demanded the smartest person on the planet to be involved? This applies to all of the subsequent actions pulled by Sister Sage. None of her methods or her planning rise above anything what we have seen before. In addition to that, any character, even Homelander, could have come up with the same shit back in season 1. I mean, we are talking about a guy who had some smarts about him. His stuff was a bit short-sighted at times, but he also did manage to figure out a whole conspiracy by the boys against them and thwart it while also pursuing his own, albeit misguided, agenda. And I wouldn't call Homelander super smart ever, even back in season 1. But I also wouldn't necessarily call whatever Sage did super smart either, and that is the issue. And then we get to the other issue with the writing around her. Things usually happen not because she is smart, but because everyone else is being an idiot. For instance, Mother's Milk, for some whatever the fuck reason, thinks he can just tap into Sister Sage's phone without any repercussions whatsoever. He, after 3 seasons of soup watch shenanigans, thought that he would just be able to listen in just like that. And of course Sister Sage feeds them the wrong intel, and of course she susses it out.
Marvin, did you really think you could tell me without me knowing?
Only the Deep would be enough of an idiot to fall for that or to put himself into that situation. There is an instance where Sage's moves are halfway smart though. So later down in the season, around episode 4, Annie's just hanging out at Starlight House, and then they see that Firecracker has set up a stage right across the road. I believe that this happens under the guidance of Sister Sage as well. And you would assume that they are not exactly there to sell Bibles, you know? So Firecracker then proceeds to do a live broadcast, accusing Starlighters of all sorts of things and spreading the Homelander agenda. There's also some of Butcher's shenanigans mixed in the episode, where he and Mother's Milk blackmail Firecracker about her relations with a minor, but
I had inappropriate relations with a sweet young man. He was 15 years old. I was born again, and my sins were washed away by the tears of his love.
she doesn't really care and everyone eats it up anyway. Anyhow, one of the things that Firecracker shares on that very public live broadcast is that Starlight had an abortion 6 months ago. What happens next is that Starlight becomes rightfully pissed off.
Starlight visited a clinic. She wasn't going for a checkup. She found out that she was pregnant, and she had an abortion. Are those my fucking medical records?
But then she decides to go to that stage across the street and beat the shit out of Firecracker. This is one of the moments where the show touches on an important social issue, and that is all fine, honestly. Of course, something like this getting weaponized in that context is something that is extremely violating. To a figure like Starlight in particular, that would mean that people would literally judge her on that one decision wherever she went. I completely sympathize with the strong feelings that this character experiences and displays, and I think that Sage choosing to target this specific aspect about Starlight is actually kinda smart. Annie comes from a deeply religious background, which I would assume Sage would be aware of. Striking in a place like this not only alienates her from her religious fanbase that she built over the seasons, it also alienates her from her family. She wasn't exactly buddies with her mother after all these seasons, but it still hurt. In addition to that, she still grew up religious, so it was the perfect spot to hit to get to her. Add to the fact that we were approaching the midway point of the season, the narrative basically demanded for something to go south for the protagonists. Sure, we objectively know that Annie just flying off to beat up Firecracker was a terrible idea, but you can see how we got here. The only part that I did not like was that the boys seemingly were caught with their pants down. Annie, for instance, reacted with shock that he accessed her medical files.
Are those my fucking medical records?
Other people also sat around shocked and just gave each other silent looks. What part of this was supposed to be shocking? The fact that the abortion happened? Maybe, yeah, sure, but I feel like by season 4, there should be already an expectation of what exactly Vought is capable of. We have already been shown that Vought could basically hack into your Rose toy if they wanted to. I feel like there's a surprising lack of strategy on their end. Like, sure, Annie's gonna go and do her thing, but why the hell is everyone so shook that this sort of an event happened in the first place? At least try to stand up and stop her, talk her down maybe. It again ties back to the sudden inexperience that the universe has when it comes to this conflict. Just in general, the season takes a lot of simplifications and shortcuts to show the supposed smarts of Sage. A lot of it is either stupidly abbreviated or happens off screen. For instance, a lot of the supposed political maneuvering that she does and is supposed to handle is barely featured. Whatever is featured, with Newman for instance, has some substance in there, I guess, but kinda still feels dumbed down if you ask me. But I guess that doesn't matter at the end because the show really forces a conclusion onto us. And the season really wants you to believe that this happens because Sister Sage was smart. But say it with me. A lot of it happens not because Sister Sage is smart, but because the world around her is dumb, in a very out of character way. So whenever the last scene comes on and she tells Homelander that he had reached their goals that she planned to reach, I am sorry, but I just don't feel like we earned that moment. I also kind of expected for there to be at least something more of it, some actual 4D chess moves happening, which just makes the plot of season 4 a bit boring for how it is developed. But this is indeed not the first and not the last time that the show becomes willfully ignorant of the material that came before it. So let's talk about something called Hypocrisy. So season 4 features a lot of politics that the show supposedly aims to satirize and mock. Something Homelander is Trump and his fanbase are right-wingers. Firecracker also yaps about nonsense conspiracies and is forgiven for her relations with a minor. To make this more clear, the show is very edgy in the way it does all of this, but you know. So we can deduce that the show aims to be progressive in its stance, and I do think it had done a decent job in doing that up until season 4. I felt they dealt decently with the sexual assault Annie experienced at the hands of the Deep. Even in season 4, when it came to her abortion, the show displayed it as upsetting and hurtful as it is. So it's not like the show doesn't have the chops to bring in the seriousness for when it is needed. But apparently the show is selective about when it is needed, and according to the show, not all assault is created equally. And I will be completely honest with you, I was fully expecting for the edginess to come around and bite the show in the ass in some way at least. The boys had this one gimmick of being a twisted version of superhero universes, and it really ran with it, thinking that the mere fact of having sex jokes is fun and insightful. So it was only a matter of time for it to become problematically crass. In its most insulting attempt to portray a male character being subjected to sexual assault, we have season 4 Huey, and oh my god, poor Huey. Before we dig in, allow me to preface this by saying that I personally am never opposed to having such topics portrayed. What I am opposed to is drawing stupid and insulting conclusions from those portrayals. So first we have episode 6 of season 4, where Huey goes undercover inside a meeting over at a soups named Tech Night. But it turns out that Huey's disguise belongs to a soup that Tech Night likes to engage in some fetish stuff with. So since you know, the boys verse soups are always perverts, and apparently that is a very funny joke, the show proceeds to show us Huey getting essayed while under disguise. Again, very hilarious and funny and twisted and, you know, cool, haha. And then on top of that, we get another situation where Huey is also essayed. So the situation is this. Sister Sage hires a shapeshifter to infiltrate the boys and assassinate the candidate for president. The shapeshifter chooses to take up the disguise of Annie and integrates themselves into her life. She kidnaps Annie, shackles her up, and full-on takes her appearance and memories. Then fake Annie, or Fanny, proceeds to try and seduce Huey, and it works. They do some kinky stuff, they have sex on screen a few times. In the meantime, Huey notices that something is not right with Fanny. However, Fanny does this weird ass thing of sort of making Huey propose to her.
Will you marry me?
Huh. You need to stay right here, okay? Just don't move.
Okay.
Do not move. Any January? I am terrified.
Some things happen and Huey does figure out that the Annie he has been around for the past few days is not his Annie. They suss out the shapeshifter, kill them, and regroup in their HQ. Then Annie proceeds to be snarky towards Huey about the engagement to Fanny since she saw the ring on her.
I actually also found your fiance.
Oh.
Congratulations.
She wasn't my fiance. No, you
put the ring on her finger.
And then Annie proceeds to interrogate Huey about how many times they had sex with Fanny.
So you did fuck her.
I mean, you know,
How many times?
had to be less than 20.
Oh my fucking god, I was gone for 10
She
days!
almost always initiated, and again, I cannot overstate this enough. I thought it was you.
Yeah, and as long as you were getting laid, you didn't look too close.
I will be merciful and I will give the show this. It is kind of valid to an extent considering that it is still a form of infidelity, I guess. Like, you know, like something outside of their relationship still did happen. So to at least talk about it and address those types of feelings can be good and realistic. I think it could be nuanced. The way Annie reacts is fucking wild though. Her first instinct is to make out Huey to be this huge piece of shit. Then she proceeds to make it all about herself by blaming Huey for somehow not recognizing that it was an imposter. And he is also made to try and prove to Annie that he loves her.
You wanna know how I knew it wasn't you? In the apartment, she wore some designer dress. And you always ditch your bra for sweats as soon as you get home. But the final clue, in the bunker, she was sweating. And you have always been, and always will be, 90% Pashmina. I love that about you. All your weird, amazing fucked upness, that's what makes you you.
And also, I just want to add that I feel like Annie's emotions, I understand why she reacted the way that she did. You know, she was experiencing a whole season of bullshit. The whole season was rough on her. So I understand why she reacted the way she did. But again, my issue is that she doesn't really apologize. The narrative doesn't really make her acknowledge that, while yeah, it's understandable why she reacted that way, it still doesn't make it okay. It still doesn't make it fine to treat Huey like that, you know? Like, she doesn't apologize. Which is a very alarming way for the show to handle this. I never would have said that the show was that mature, but the handling of this situation is very disappointing. And this is also coupled with Huey losing his dad and having a whole storyline around that. So naturally, there was some very well-deserved backlash. And this is now the second time that we are talking about the creator of the show, Eric Kripke. And I will admit here that I knew nothing of this person before. I knew that Supernatural existed, that was popular, but I had no idea he was responsible for it. But what I did know of him was that he was was quite outspoken about his beliefs. He's anti-MAGA, he's anti-Trump, and all of that is, fine and dandy, but whenever it comes to this show and him commenting on it, it more often than not just goes wrong. I swear, whenever this man tries to justify a controversial decision in the show, the explanation just kind of makes it worse in a way. So first we have his comments about the Tech Knight fetish episode, aka episode 6. Variety. Let's start with the Tech Knight sex dungeon part. Where did the idea come for it? And why bring Huey into the situation now, kicking him when he is down by having him sexually assaulted by his childhood hero and after his dad just died? Well, that's a dark way to look at it. We view it as hilarious. He then goes on to explain how Tech Knight is their perverted version of Batman, and then he elaborates on their research into fetishes and kinks. Honestly, judging by the way it is phrased, it seems like Kripke was glowing and beaming while recounting all of this. It seems like he had a delightful and jolly old time. And usually when showrunners are asked about approaching sensitive topics in their TV shows, they first begin by stating something like that they recognize the sensitivity of the topic, how it is relevant to the character, to the wider social context, things that indicate that they actually care. Wait. I just remembered something. The Boys has always been a controversial project, and its irreverence often leans into offensiveness. You deal with that in the first episode by adapting a scene that in the comic is a brutal sexual assault played for shock and laughs. What went into your choice to adapt it, and the way you ended up representing the scene? Kripke responds, "We put an incredible amount of care into that because we knew it was in the source material. It was always a question of, okay, are we going to include that scene? And if we're going to include it, how are we going to depict it?" So it was an incredible amount of conversation with a lot of women of my writing staff and the women who are producers on the show, making sure to really hear everyone's personal experiences, hearing their diverse points of view, discussing whether we should put something like this in what is a superhero show, and thinking whether we were going to inadvertently make light of it. I agree that in Garth's, aka original creators of the comics, work, it was put in for shock value, but in this day and age, and it being part of the Me Too movement and conversation, it's not funny. It's a horrific experience that has been revealed as something that far too many women have gone through, so you can't make light of it. It's really horrific. I can rip him a new one for that, but that surely has been done. What I do want to point out is that this is some very clear evidence that SA was not even really a dimension that was even considered in the case of Huey. I want to assume the best here and say that I am sure this wasn't malice or intentional need to offend, but it does not inspire confidence that the first thing to remark about in this instance is how twisted and edgy the idea of Tech Knight is. It reverses the purpose of a scene within a given work, where the purpose is no more to carry a deeper meaning and use the idea to do so, but to just use an idea without a deeper meaning. You will notice that a lot of soups become exactly that from this season onwards, which only downgrades the writing, I would say. So then, when he was asked about the backlash around the situation with Annie, Kripke had this to say: "I always appreciate and respect the fans' opinion. I see the point. I think so much of the show is Huey's coming of age and really growing from the kid you met in the pilot to this fully functioning adult and badass in the final episode. And you really have to go through a gauntlet and a crucible to become that. And so he had to go through a lot of tough times that season to really finally have that final push into maturity. So it was all justified to the character. Did it get a little too gnarly at times? Probably, yeah, but I think we always start with what's necessary for the character, and I think he needed to go through a lot of that to become his fully realized self, which is really the heart and the soul of the Boys. So I just have a few thoughts. First of all, saying that a character who went through sexual assault on screen needed that push into maturity is certainly a fucking choice. Surely that is not what was on his mind when he said that, but I am not sure whether unintentional problematics are better than intentional ones. Second of all, I feel like it is very funny that he mentions the pilot episode. The thing is that the pilot episode already does rather well what Kripke was expecting for season 4 to do in terms of Huey's character. His arc on the show already begins with him losing someone. Not only that, it happened in an extremely traumatic way. This set up for him to both deal with the emotional fallout from the killing and for disillusionment with Soups. Kripke correctly identifies that this is Huey's coming-of-age story, but it is an arc that was already covered before in the show. What was the moment where Huey chose to kill Translucent, if not him slowly coming of age? What were the multiple moments where he chose to stay in the boy's Boys on his own volition if not him maturing. There's already ample evidence to suggest that Huey is already there because we already did the work. This idea of a final push by Kripke only makes sense if he considers Huey's nerdiness or heart to be a symptom of immaturity and is attempting to crush the last pieces of light that exist inside of Huey, which in itself is immensely immature and deeply misguided. My overall problem with this is that these types of dumb decisions just overall devalue whatever progressive point the show is trying to make. If you want to be progressive, you better be sure to be on top of that. You cannot criticize and satirize the supposed other side so hard if you yourself are such a bad advocate for yours. And I just want to add and clarify some things, like the reason why I even mentioned Firecracker at the beginning of this section in the first place is that the narrative shows her side of the political spectrum, kind of forgiving her for what she did to that minor, which is statutory rape, which is, it's dismissive towards the male minor victim in the situation, which is kind of sort of how the narrative treats Huey as well, so I think that is the main hypocrisy here, among others, but yeah. And then we get to Gen V Season 2. And where Season 2 goes wrong is that it copies the mentality we discussed from Season 1. Gen V Season 2 exists in the immediate background of the end of The Boys Season 4. There is a full-out war between Homelander supporters and the so-called Starlighters. The situation is really shit in that universe during the season, and this is very well reflected in the show. Now, you won't guess what the plot of the season turns out. It is yet another narrative argument for the defeat of Homelander, but in a much more offensive way. This time, The Boys does nothing with it and doesn't even breathe onto this narrative point due to the reasons stated before. But damn, isn't it funny that this happens? So to fully explain it, we have to go back to Season 1 of Gen V. So Gen V begins by introducing us to Marie Moreau, a young soup who has the power to control blood. Something Bloody Marie. She has quite a tragic past. She grew up in a home and has a rough upbringing. She still ends up at Godolkin University. She's actually a really cool character. I liked having her around. Anyway, in Season 2, we are slowly finding out more about her power set. It is revealed to her that she's actually not a regular soup, but she was part of something called Project Odessa. It was started at Vought by Thomas Godolkin, a scientist who the university is named after and someone who worked with Frederick Vought, the guy who made V. The project sought to produce godlike soups. Only 2 soups came out of it. One of them is Marie Moreau, and the other is Homelander. The season itself is very explicit in the fact that Marie is special and powerful. All she needed to do was develop her powers further, which is why the main villain of the season is a mind-hopping Thomas Godolkin, someone who has the OP power of puppeteering and seeks to impose certain measures onto the soup population. He believes the weak soups should be wiped out and that soups should be pushed to their limit to reveal the true extent of their abilities, which is a perfect framework to find out just how powerful Marie is. And she is very powerful. She manages to resurrect people and kill Godolkin, and also add the fact that they keep grouping her in with Homelander. That's nothing to scoff at in the Boys universe, so I think you see what I mean when I say that this show was setting up Marie for something of importance when it comes to defeating Homelander. In addition to that, this Gen V season ends with the main crew getting recruited by A-Train and Starlight to join the Resistance. So naturally, the Boys Season 5, which follows right after Gen V Season 2, uses none of it. Why? Well, we went over why. Say it with me like a prayer. They expect for the viewers of Gen V to be viewers of The Boys, but they do not expect for the viewers of The Boys to be the viewers of Gen V. The math on this is so simple. But it is fucking shambolic to what extent The Boys ignores the relevant details from Gen V. The first part is Marie Moreau as a soup. She has only a couple of scenes, and in one of them, wouldn't you know it, they make a point that she is not ready to use her powers.
It's over, okay? So just tell those other guys to run while they can.
Hold on, that's it? Aren't you the one who recruited us to fight your fight? We want to help.
What good's all that power, Marie, if you can't control it?
It is not too big of a stretch, I guess, that she may not have her skill set quite ready, but I think Season 5 would have been a nice opportunity to develop it further, but we cannot do that now, can we? Suddenly bringing up a character like Marie without the setup that happened in an entirely different show would mean that Marie would become a bit of a Hail Mary, or Hail Marie, narratively speaking. To an extent, this also applies to the rest of the group making appearances in the show. The rest of the cast of Gen V, even after being recruited for active rebellion, do fuck all and are glorified cameos. And because of this, it kinda sucks to be invested in the Boys universe, because now we are sitting at such a weird point that Gen V, naturally so, was so intertwined into the main The Boys narrative. Its second season was literally building up to the final season of The Boys, so you would expect for the narratives to merge at least in some substantial way, but I also get why they didn't go for it, which makes the whole Gen V handling just so stupid, because you could have just predicted all of this. I was one of the 5 people who watched it and found some amount of enjoyment of it, so you can imagine that the cancellation of Gen V wasn't really giving me much joy. Was it surprising? I mean, no, not really. Just go compare how many reviews Gen V gets on IMDb in comparison to The Boys and how much engagement it gets. So let's hear why this happened in the case of Gen V from the man himself, Eric Kripke. And you can trust him to generate an absolutely ridiculous take, because he said, she has all of this power, and everyone online is like, well, why doesn't she just go take on Homelander? I'm like, she's a 19-year-old kid. She has no idea how to wield any of it in any sort of responsible, controlled way, Kripke said. Were there to be another season of Gen V, that would be her training with Yoda season, where she really learns how to take the next step. The fact that she's super powerful, which she is, does not mean she's automatically ready for every single conflict, much less one as big as Homelander. It could be quite dangerous, and she still has a long road to go. That's what we try to plan there. And again, I feel like that is valid in certain ways that we have already touched on before, but it also isn't, in the sense that nobody was actually asking for Marie to single-handedly take down Homelander. I haven't seen a single person saying that it should happen. What people were hoping for, at best, is for them to at least be with the boys fighting other supes to defeat Homelander, or for Marie to maybe hold Homelander back for a second or two. What people were asking for, and rightfully so, is for something. Anything to come out of Gen V Season 2. If there are so many people asking about it and you have to go as far as to acknowledge it, there comes a time where you have to think whether you actually conveyed what you wanted to convey. It is also ultra fucking dumb that Annie goes ahead to recruit Marie into the rebellion, knowing her power set, and they don't even make an attempt at training Marie. There is a whole apocalypse basically happening with Homelander in the front, and the whole cast is wholly uninterested in even exploring what Marie is capable of in the context of this fight. We know why, but that still makes it narratively dumb to just stop her progress at such a pivotal moment. Project Odessa is not even mentioned or discussed, something that I am sure the boys would have liked to hear, and this is all even before we properly get into The Boys Season 5. And Season 5 is truly a culmination of all the universe's worst impulses. Underwhelming, dragging, unexciting, whatever you call it, you won't be wrong. I think I will say that the season was not completely bad, but it certainly doesn't live up to what it had set up before. It is aggressively mid, and that is very disappointing. The season does something that is rather baffling. It proceeds to introduce a completely new narrative loop. This feels like a failure on behalf of the universe, considering that it had 3 seasons of content post Season 3 to follow up on. And it wasn't like there wasn't anything to follow up on. Instead, it reintroduces Soldier Boy. Now mind you, by the end of Season 3, Soldier Boy is put back into hibernation, and at the end of Season 4, it is revealed to Homelander that Soldier Boy is still around, so due to his raging daddy issues, he chooses to wake him up. What happens next in the narrative is that we get another round of lore on Soldier Boy. Forget about all the stuff with Payback and the Russian torture, no. We introduce yet another round of lore specifically for Soldier Boy, and specifically lore that feeds perfectly into the announced spin-off titled Vought Rising, which is why the final season sometimes doesn't really read as the final season of The Boys, but as a backdoor pilot for Vought Rising, and that is not a good thing by any stretch. So we get introduced to something called V1, a Vought formula that was the original one and was unstable. It produced all of the spin-off soups, and it is also what makes Soldier Boy immortal. Now there is some power scaling shenanigans going on here, because I guess V1 doesn't really make you more powerful, just immortal. Homelander becomes interested in it because it also makes a soup more resistant to the virus, which, you know what, it's not that bad. Soldier Boy was not shown to be fully immune to it, so it would not completely eliminate the threat that the virus poses, right? Well, the virus is not really featured in that way in the final few episodes. Homelander just gets V1 and that's it. It apparently doesn't matter that Soldier Boy became unconscious after being infected, which would have surely helped with Homelander, and that is how that storyline goes down the drain. Then we get Marie and the Gen V cast, as well as any relevant info on Project Odessa. We discussed how that went, so that particular storyline also goes down the drain. So now Season 4 of the main show and both seasons of Gen V officially amount to nothing when it comes to the final confrontation and how Homelander is defeated, despite the fact that in universe it could have. Then we also get to how exactly Homelander gets the V1, and he gets it because...
You know, Clara used to say the craziest shit. That I was the strongest supe alive. The ultimate expression of what we could be. But she was wrong. She hadn't met you yet. And this is what she would want.
For clarity, Clara that is referenced here is Stormfront, from the first batch of seasons. Season 5 tries to make it out like Clara is someone that was deeply important to Soldier Boy, so much so that he would do something as idiotic as flip his script and hand the V1 over to Homelander. Do I think this is necessarily bad? I don't even know, honestly. What I do think is that this is a very obvious ass-pull for the last season. The search for V1 also sends us all over the place in this goose chase that takes episodes. And I swear to you, as I was watching the show weekly, my interest in it just decreased and decreased. Sure, the season started off pretty strong, but by the point Homelander even got the V1, I just could not care what happened. In that time, we have this weird bond between Soldier Boy and Homelander. Soldier Boy keeps saying how Homelander is a freak, but also has this weird affection towards him, which I personally didn't care for at all, felt weird, didn't feel believable, not interesting. I also have seen people say that they didn't necessarily know that the season was intended to set up anything in the first place and that it didn't interfere with their enjoyment of the show, which is valid. If you enjoyed it, of course, it's good for you. But even without knowing it, the whole emotional core of the season is just not very well written. We can look at what Eric Kripke has to say about the backlash surrounding the situation, and of course it gets addressed from a completely irrelevant angle. Some of the most vocal online fans seem to have really misunderstood the "it's what Clara would have wanted" line, Soldier Boy's reference to a character who was a full-on Nazi. They seem to think the viewer was supposed to sympathize with Soldier Boy and Clara in that moment, which wasn't at all what you were trying to do. Kripke responds to that with, "No, of course not. Clara's goal was to create an Aryan super soldier, and Soldier Boy is misguided in his love for her. He's imperfect in his love for her. He's bad at picking partners, and she's a Nazi. It's as if Captain America was in bed with a Nazi, and that's the point. So this woman that he still holds a candle for would have wanted for this Aryan super soldier of infinite power, and she used to think it was gonna be Soldier Boy, but he couldn't be that thing for her, so maybe he can still give her the thing that she wants." What am I reading? But was anyone even questioning why he did that or was disagreeing with it? No one was objecting to the contents. Character morality and audience sympathy are the last thing anyone questions in the boys universe, so let's not even pretend that this now is a huge thing. I think people were just objecting to its existence in the first place. Oh, and also, we get to Sister Sage. Again, belt to fucking ass. In Season 4, Sister Sage was shown to manipulate events, and she did that through exploiting people's emotions. Again, one of the first things that she did was polarize people against each other. She literally uses the same ammo as Vought always used and puppets people. In Season 5, however, Soldier Boy gives Homelander V1 in the power of love, and she apparently could not have predicted this.
I don't understand. He wasn't supposed to. It's impossible.
It doesn't matter that Baxley warned her about this.
You were right. He's thinking about helping Homelander.
She warned Sister Sage about Soldier Boy's affections towards Homelander previously, but no, apparently it did not influence her judgment.
What the fuck was that?
I can explain.
That was Clara.
The amount of cope that exists online around that is baffling, because the main assumption is that this is somehow just a flaw that all genius characters have and that they cannot understand human emotion because, ooh, they are so smart and detached and arrogant and inhuman and ooh. And I dislike that because this is the Divergent series level of logic. This is the one trope that the show could have actually defied, and I kinda thought for a moment that they would, but apparently I was wrong. While it is a trope and it can be true, I disagree that a smart character can never ever understand an emotion such as love. Sister Sage seems to study people around her all the time. She knows how people work. I would disagree that she would just not have the ability to understand love in the first place or that she underestimates it. But even if you're ultra smart, you don't even have to fully understand that. What you do have to understand is what actions come out of it. This trope always triggers me exactly because of this reason. Because sure, emotions are internal, but those emotions, however irrational they may seem to be sometimes, still are externalized reactions. And after a certain point, that just becomes pattern recognition. Like I hate when the shows or movies pretend like love is this indecipherable thing that moves mountains. It's not hard to do the math that love equals convenient decisions for the loved people and positive predisposition towards them, and I find that unsurprising. She was never that smart as the show claimed in the first place, so it's not a shocker that the writers fumbled the bag with her in the dumbest way possible. And this is just a few of the issues this season. We are not even touching on how dumb Second Noir's death was, or the dumbass fact that Kimiko somehow cannot talk to people and just spouts profanities all of a sudden, or how the show fills time with stupid soup jokes. But then we get to the true ass-to-ass moment for the show, which is the final 2 episodes of Season 5. I really do not like the 2 final episodes for multiple reasons, and apparently so does everyone else. The 2 episodes are currently rated at 5.8 and 5.6 on IMDb respectively, so it's a very prestigious score. The first reason why is purely narrative. So since the virus for no reason in particular is assumed to be not an option and nobody cares about Marie, the boys need to come up with a new solution to the problem of Homelander. And the solution they come up with is the same solution as season 3. So the team decides that they should just do some radiation shenanigans on Kimiko in order to replicate Soldier Boy's powers. This happens in the 7th episode of the season, 1 episode away from the finale, and I fucking hate that. I hate the fact that after 4 seasons of content, the best and final solution we come to is the same one that we had in season 3 but with 1 or 2 extra steps. It is unfathomable how the show looks at season 3 finale, decides, fuck it, we are not done yet, move Soldier Boy depowering Homelander as a plot point downwards in their document for the outline, and proceed to add all that content. I am not discounting the parts that were well done. A-Train's arc is great throughout, Ashley is really not that bad. For a hot second there, they were doing something interesting with Annie. But these things do not make up for everything. The more egregious thing is that the 2 final episodes disregard even this season's plot elements. Forget about Gen V. The show doesn't particularly care about the fact that Homelander took V1. It does absolutely nothing to move the needle in the grand scheme. Soldier Boy just gets put back into ice, Sister Sage's plan just fails, and that is that on that. Quite literally, every plot element gets eliminated one by one, and then we get the finale we could have gotten sooner. But that is not even the biggest gripe. The biggest gripe is, of course, the way the final battle goes down. All the way back in the halcyon days of season 3, Homelander and Butcher sit down together and have a talk where they promise scorched earth and blood and bone.
Vought. Giving and taking, just to keep everything exactly the same. What if it doesn't have to be that way? Well, what if we share a different destiny? Something scorched earth, blood and bone.
Which is also the title of the finale because they thought they did something there. So naturally, everyone took this to be foreshadowing for the eventual final showdown that we would get between these 2 characters. The show also built up towards this moment by consistently showing Homelander becoming more and more unhinged, while also Butcher was getting more and more unhinged. Shit was heading in a downward spiral all over everywhere. Even season 4 and 5 posters featured carnage and destruction that pretty much pointed exactly at that. But it turned out that these posters were load-bearing posters, because that is all the scorched earth you were gonna get. Yes, I know this argument has already been discussed 20 times over, but that said, it's my turn to post about this. Season 5 goes surprisingly limp on every part of world building or writing. It fails to show the full effects of this new regime and thus squanders whatever effect it might have had when it comes to whatever satire or parody they were trying to do. It has been discussed a lot already, so instead I want to focus on the clownery around it rather than the clownery in it. Kripke's stance on this seems to be this. There are 2 things I would say. First, I'm just glad people are passionate, legitimately. My job is to make people passionate about the work I put out. If they're arguing about it and hating it and fighting, that's all passion, man. You're watching and that's all good. My job is to get an emotional reaction, not necessarily to dictate what that emotional reaction is. Which does seem to be in line with basically every decision made on the show so far. If that is the logic, it really illuminates all the useless edgy stuff, doesn't it? The second thing Kripke would say is a lesson he's learned 1,000 times over, though it still bears repeating. The online world is not a real world. We have way north of 60 million viewers, so that makes the online storm, which feels very all-encompassing, actually a fraction of a single percentage point, Kripke explains. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, of course, and I'm sorry if I disappointed you, but it was the story I wanted to tell. You just have to put it into perspective of it being a reasonably small vocal audience, when the vast majority seem to be happily tuning in. So let's apply some discourse analysis. Happily, according to who? I inherently disagree with this take because I did not see anyone from the show's team making this argument when it came to all the praise that the show received. If there is hype and a lot of compliments online, you also have to either have the same mentality that it is not representative of the entire picture or accept both sides. It cuts both ways. If it doesn't, then we steer into the dangerous territory of potentially drinking our own Kool-Aid, and that is something nobody should strive for. There are instances where there are groups who just trash talk a TV show due due to their own stupid reasons. And I understand that Kripke might as well have faced it with the boys, I cannot deny that. But what happened here wasn't exactly all that. If that is the response he chose to provide, maybe it is better to just remain silent then and take it on the chin. I'm just saying, you know? Then we get to the other matter of Scorched Earth itself. The Rolling Stone posed this question: on a practical story level, did you essentially introduce the concept of Soldier Boy's ability to remove superpowers with an energy blast as your ace in the hole? Because you also had a soup-killing virus that you never used. To which Kripke responded: we knew very early on that was gonna be a really useful tool. In our minds, the virus was more representing, can you really go Scorched Earth and destroy everything on the planet in exchange for accomplishing your goal? Because I think Sage was right. There would be a very messy slaughter of a lot of people if that virus were to be released. So you can't actually release it. The depowering blast was something that was in our pocket heading into the season. Okay, does this make sense to any one of you? Because it sure as fuck doesn't make sense to me. Again, discourse analysis. To whom are we applying this logic? This response assumes that both sides of the conflict somehow have this deep morality towards the virus. If this is the full justification for not going Scorched Earth, then it makes no sense. Maybe the response is just due to the way the question is phrased, but I do think it is indicative of the underlying logic behind what happens. Why is the show suddenly so against the very messy slaughter of a lot of people? It was never concerned about that before when it came to terrible situations happening to this world, so why the fuck now? In addition to that, Homelander had no incentive to not do something that was off the rails. Homelander is the one who should really be stopped in the first place, so why is he also bound by the same mentality of, can you really go Scorched Earth and destroy everything on the planet in exchange for accomplishing your goal? He has been going downhill all this time psychologically, so it is wild that somehow the show is now concerned about the very messy slaughter of a lot of people. Even when it comes to the posters and the marketing, the discourse around it is pretty divided. Some people say that it is only marketing and it is meant to draw you in, it doesn't have to be entirely representative of the show. Others say that it should be representative, and fuck yeah, it should. Kripke has expressed that he told the story he wanted to tell, and that it was always meant to be more intimate, which I have many questions about, but whatever. There is a possibility that the writing team and marketing do not communicate and marketing did whatever they wanted, sure, but I don't even feel like it matters, because the marketing material aligned perfectly with the expectations that people had. The reason why it worked well in drawing viewers in is because it delivered on the promises made within the show. It is the show itself that drops the ball here, not the marketing. But the show also drops the ball on something called themes. If it was not already obvious by the example of Scorched Earth, the initial goals that the boys had did not allow for a sustained universe. Dare I say it? The boys never had a world that could sustain a broader shared narrative, and it only would have been made possible if it betrayed at least one part of its initial promise. The last thing that didn't sit entirely well with me was the closure that the characters received. After Homelander is defeated, everyone just lays down their weapons. There is the death of Butcher, but that is irrelevant to what I am about to say. The boy sort of lands on this very weird conclusion, which is basically they defeated Homelander and they assumed that this was it, but that would also assume that their entire beef was with Homelander in the first place. The first couple of seasons established pretty well that Homelander was not the issue itself, but a symptom of a larger problem at hand, Vought. The further down we went, the show pulled a trick where it made the Homelander keep moving upwards and upwards, so that he effectively was running Vought. Within the narrative, some might say that Homelander became Vought. It is, however, a misguided way to look at it. It is a distraction from the true issue, and it is a distraction that the show falls for. There is a scene where we see Stan Edgar step in as the CEO again, which is okay, cool, but I do not particularly like that the characters or the show itself doesn't really further acknowledge that the fight is not even over. Far from that. As long as Vought exists, the fight will go on, and Vought is a problem at such a giant scale that really, only Scorched Earth can shake things up enough to maybe get rid of it. Even when you think about it, the virus was a direct threat to Vought, their product, and, in extension, to their influence. And I think it is very telling that the show suddenly grows morals about the virus and forgoes using it. And this is where the problem came. The show began to give too much of a shit about the world and its characters. Whoever is making this became too attached to deliver on the themes at the end. And such a gory and brutal story as The Boys needed detachment and also brevity. It shows up in multiple ways. If you look at it in a certain way, you can interpret Kripke's hesitancy in releasing or using the virus and messing up that world as being cautious because he got too attached to the world. You can interpret him going limp on the finale and Scorched Earth in the same way, or you can also just look at the show itself. Homelander, quite famous for all the brutal ways he uses to kill people, suddenly just does enough damage to Frenchie just so he could have an emotional moment with Kimiko and the rest. There has also been some debate how exactly Frenchie died, because apparently the show is a bit confusing about that, but he didn't die from radiation. I have no idea how people exactly came to that, since I felt it was pretty obvious. It likely contributed, but both what is shown on screen and what is said off screen confirm that Homelander is the one that mortally wounds him. It doesn't matter that earlier in the episode it stated that someone can die from radiation by bleeding out of their ass. Frenchie doesn't do that unless his asshole is in the front. Okay, so the following is going to be a bit of a random ass poll, but on July 30th of 2019, Eric Kripke participated in an AMA on Reddit. Kripke was asked whether there was any worry about the perception of any of the more over-the-top or offensive things in the show, to which he responded, "We never really discussed what would be too offensive. The main rule was whether it furthered the story, the characters, or the world. We didn't want to be shocking for shocking's sake. We just wanted to create this world as realistically as possible, which meant sometimes seeing really brutal things because that's what would really happen if, say, a super fist really met human flesh." And for the most part in the beginning there, the show kept up that promise because it held no darlings when it came to characters. The scene all the way back in season 1 when Homelander just lasers through Madeline Stillwell still goes hard. Shit, Homelander dealt with Black Noir in a way more brutal and less graceful way than he did with Frenchie, and Noir was his longtime teammate and ally. It doesn't matter that the Homelander doesn't kill people who don't fear him or something. I don't even believe it would even apply here. There is no reason for Homelander to not leave Frenchie as a slushie in a bucket except for some sappy attachment that the writing team had for Frenchie. I'm sorry, but this whole sequence just didn't feel realistic within the show. It felt very much like a TV death. And that is, I believe, exactly what the boys seemed to denounce at first, but that has since changed. You can also feel it just by the amount of plot armor the boys team has had over the years, or the amount of actually consequential characters that have died, which had dwindled as time went on. So I am just left with a single question. Was it truly worth it? What really kicks me in the situation is that in Season 5, they do the exact same thing that they avoided doing with Gen V. They use plot elements from Vought Rising and carry them over into The Boys. I will defend this universe in a very weird way and say that the effect that we see from Season 5 would have been the same effect that we would have seen if Marie did have a substantial role in the final season. Let me explain. In the current state, the way that Vought Rising elements were handled is viewed backwards to how, for instance, Gen V was integrated. Obviously, it is viewed as a promotion of Vought Rising since Vought Rising is yet to be released. This is quite literally the only difference between Gen V and Vought Rising, release dates in relation to The Boys. It also doesn't help that this difference also points to a potential motive behind these choices in the first place, which is again, promotion. It is obvious that Soldier Boy's switch is built on whatever the hell happens in the prequel, yet in the same breath, we couldn't have Gen V characters in there because we recognize that not all people will have watched it, and we recognize that it would be egregious to introduce a character like Marie without more context or setup. The sudden love for Clara, while not exactly a match for Marie, is still a plot element that requires more build-up and context. The majority of the reason why I think people are so apprehensive towards it is that it wasn't written out for us properly. I don't even believe that it's a retcon or it doesn't make sense, it's just we lack context. It is a terrible idea to build a season of a show to rely on an additional show to do the legwork for it, and it is not even available to watch right now. The very core truth of this debacle is that the universe seems to be operating on the assumption that it has gathered enough goodwill and trust with audiences and assume they will follow them everywhere. It jumps into Marvel's mentality post-Endgame without having its Endgame moment. So what is the conclusion of this video? At this moment, VCU feels like an ill-conceived, self-contradictory idea that was clearly there because The Boys were popular. The goodwill and trust towards this universe is most likely pretty low. If you go to look at Vought Rising trailer and comments left under it, you can see everyone clowning on it, and rightfully so. For me personally, the mere example of how they handled Gen V has completely turned off any possible enjoyment I could have from anything that comes out of this universe. It is premature to say that this universe is completely doomed since, who knows, Vought Rising might be good. But the universe has lost a lot of goodwill as it is. It doesn't even matter whether it receives glowing reviews since some form of damage has already been done. So again, was it truly worth it to do it in this way? Was it worth it to ruin the themes of the show and the satire of the show just so we could have an extended universe? Was it worth it to ruin the narrative? Was it worth it to ruin characters? Was any of it worth it? Anyhow, if you have managed to make it to the end of this video, you are a champion, you're a trooper. Once again, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, it really helps out a lot. Give this video a comment, give this video a like, give this video a hype. Anyway, I hope you all have a lovely day ahead of you, and that is a wrap on the downfall of the boys.